I wanted to give you a little taste of what I mean when I talk about religion in the context of my family and my spiritual tradition. So this is an amazing book that is well used in my home. It's called Prayers for a Planetary Pilgrim. This prayer is called a Psalm of My Awareness. The question, where have I come from, rises up and haunts me. Lingering, it floats like a flower in the backwaters of my mind. From somewhere deeper than I know, in the place where I am held to the divine breast, the voice of God echoes in reply. You, my beloved little one, were hidden in my heart before your sun burned bright. You were the dream of my delight before the earth was born of the dust of long dead stars. Before I shaped a single star, I nursed you for endless ages, feeding you with the essence of my life. In my great lap, I played with your infinite childlike form and gazed with love upon your original face, the mirror form of my own image. I laughed with delight at the marvel of your being, the flesh of my flesh and the bone of my bone. And you laughed with glee as I winked, as the four winds sprung to life and suns like dandelions lit up the dark lawn of space. Where did you come from? Oh, my child, you in whom live all my hopes and loves, you came from me. I remember a night gathered with my dearest friends, candlelight bouncing off the walls of a geodesic dome. My medicine brother, Connor, had brought his father to a ceremony, and Connor sat in the facilitator's chair behind the altar, playing a song on his guitar. The brothers and sisters were gathered around, embraced in mother's mantle, swaying to Connor's song, and rapped. When he was finished, he sat down between me and his father. His dad embraced him, squeezed him tight, and said in a whisper, "You bring me so much joy." In my 2 years of gathering stories and writing articles for psychedelicparenting.org, I have been privy to an emergence. While many in the wider society would define family values in a way that excludes a father and a son from consuming a strong entheogen together, it has been my experience that inside of the medicine circle, we are forced to abandon our pretensions. We are stripped of all pride, pain, damage, and anger. What is left is the love that we share for our spiritual brothers and sisters in the ceremony. And this experience of oneness, of universal unconditional love, can be even more powerful when it is shared with a family member, with blood, with someone who knows us better than we even know ourselves. For me, and for many of the people whose stories I've been blessed to share and record, the values imparted by the psychedelic experience, especially when done in community, are as much family values as any espoused by Fox News or the 700 Club. But what do we mean when we say family values? Well, a sociological definition of family values is traditional or cultural values, that is, values passed from generation to generation within families that pertain to the family structure, function, roles, beliefs, attitudes, and ideals. So this is a fairly straightforward, unencumbered conceptualization, which I think anybody could probably agree with, but this is an academic definition, and clearly we live in a political world. So what do we mean when we hear the term family values on a television show or from the lips of a legislator? Here we have 7 traditional or family values as espoused by the Traditional Values Coalition, a conservative think tank and lobbying group. First is the right to life, which includes an opposition to abortion and euthanasia, but strangely enough, includes a support of the death penalty and of war when needed. Second is sexual fidelity, which includes an opposition to premarital sex and adultery, a support of large families, and of traditional gender roles in marriage. Next is an opposition to homosexuality and other, quote, deviant sexual behaviors. So this is an opposition to gay marriage, to gay adoption, to S&M, to polyamory, basically anything that doesn't look like mom, dad, 2 kids. Next is an opposition to pornography, which also they include other kinds of sex work. Support of patriotism, unsurprisingly defined conservatively as an opposition to taxes and big government, a support of the military, support of law enforcement, the right to own guns, and of free market capitalism. Next, we have religious freedom, which is defined very selectively in these circles as to mean a support of Christians to not participate in certain things that they deem morally unacceptable. So we have here Hobby Lobby, which successfully won a court case to deny the right to pay for insurance that would cover certain kinds of contraception, as well as our friend here, Kim Davis. And we have an opposition to providing services to gay and lesbian people, and also trying to bring creationism into schools. Next, we have an opposition to, quote, addictive behaviors, which includes things that they define as dangerous drugs, such as cannabis and psychedelics, and alcohol, but also gambling, and a robust support of the law enforcement that is behind those things, as well as abstinence-based drug education, such as DARE and other wonderful programs such as that. Other groups on the political right may have a somewhat different list, but I think this is a good snapshot of what is meant when we hear family values in a political context. It is notable how skewed this list is toward that which the group is against, rather than that which it is for, and even the items that are expressed in the positive, such as religious freedom, are primarily conceived of in terms of that which the family sets itself apart from, or those things that are opposed to on fundamental religious grounds, and thus feel they cannot be forced to accept or even tolerate. But we are in a period of great re-envisioning as a society, I believe. We've re-envisioned what it means to be family through the pioneering efforts of people like my fellow Michiganders, April DeBoer and Jane Rouse, who forced the nation to recognize the right of gay and lesbian couples to marry and jointly care for children. Why not then, as we re-envision what it means to be family, why not re-envision family values? Can we not reevaluate the core of our beliefs and choose love over hate, acceptance over opposition, and tolerance over discrimination? We at psychedelicparenting.org humbly offer for your consideration the 5 psychedelic family values as coined by one of our bloggers, Daphne Dawn. Number 1 is spiritual growth and openness. I would like to read from this quote of Alex Gray. I was a teenage nihilist on the verge of suicide when I asked a God that I did not believe in to show me a sign. Within 24 hours, I had taken my first LSD trip, seen the unity and luminosity of all things, and met the love of my life, a goddess manifest, Allison, my constant partner and companion. Journeying together, we experienced a vision that further changed our life and work. Dissolving into light, we saw that every being and thing was interconnected, an infinite grid of fountains and drains of love energy. This changed our work in pursuit of depicting the unveiling of reality. Through this value, the psychedelic family supports the spiritual quest of all of its members, whether their paths are the same or different. We create a home where children are given a solid grounding in the religious or spiritual life of their parents, but where they are free to find their own path when the calling comes to them. We support family prayer and meditation time, and we reject teachings that would force a way of believing out of fear rather than coasting through love, which we can see by the Spanish Inquisition, which no one ever suspects. Number 2 is conscious living. In conscious living, we embrace the values of environmental conservation, of service to our fellow human beings through finding ways within our power to eliminate or reduce the suffering of others. We reject the values of the world that support death and destruction of humans and their environments. And we see the efforts for religious rights for psychedelic families and cognitive liberty as being in solidarity with the efforts such as feminism, the LGBT rights movement, and Black Lives Matter. In fact, we recognize that if we are white, male, educated, cisgendered, and financially secure, that we have a duty to recognize our white privilege and do what we can to minimize its negative effects. Next is infinite curiosity. Through infinite curiosity, the psychedelic family vows to create a home where science is revered, where young minds expand through learning, experimenting, and dreaming. We use our time, talents, and treasures as stewards to create a learning experiences for our kids. We encourage questioning on all levels, and we vow to answer all questions that come in ways that encourage rather than discourage inquiry. Number 4 is radical honesty. This is a value that is the closest to my own heart and my spiritual path. Through radical honesty, the psychedelic family creates an environment where truth sits on an altar in the center of our homes. We are honest with each other about our emotions, about sexuality, and about our medicines. As psychedelic parents, we follow the lead of Allison Gray, who, when discussing her own psychedelic parenting, said that she and Alex made a point of answering any questions their daughter Zena would ask of them about their use of entheogens, but without giving more information than she was ready to receive. And finally, number 5 is authentic expression. Through authentic expression, the psychedelic family cultivates an environment where children are free to be who they are and who they want to become. In the psychedelic family, we give our children the space to express themselves as they are, be that through art and music, their choice of clothing, their gender identity or sexual orientation. And we soundly reject bullying on all forms. So these are the psychedelic family values, consciously considered and purposefully transmitted through our thoughts, words, and actions in our family life. How then can we ensure that these values outlive us and be transmitted in a way that they can have transformative power over the wider culture? I would offer that we do so in the form that takes on the mantle of religion and demands for itself the protections of religious freedom guaranteed in the First Amendment of our Constitution. But what do we mean when we say religion? This word itself has gotten a bad rap in many circles that we move, and the term religious freedom, as we have previously seen, may seem irreparably tainted by the likes of Kim Davis and Hobby Lobby. But I think that there is hope in this regard. In his 2013 talk at the MAPS Psychedelic Conference, if any of you have not seen this talk, I think that it is required viewing for everybody in the psychedelic movement. Bob defines religion as a person's experience of a beyond. The essential religious experience under this definition has three elements. Number one, there's a new way of understanding or interpreting ultimate reality, which is the earliest stage of doctrine. This new way of understanding reality inspires new ways of interacting and behaving with others, which are the proto-forms of ethics. This often leads to a desire to celebrate or give thanks for this experience, which is the basis of ritual. This does not have to contain dogma, closed-minded thinking or behavior, hatred of the other, legalism, or empty ritualism. Therefore, what makes this religious form most alive and most renewable is when the ritual itself points back to or contains that experience which Bob calls the beyond. It's an experience of transcendence, of mystical non-duality, of unity and oneness. When the ritual points back directly to the mystical experience in this way, it can renew and revivify doctrine, give insight to the present moment, and help us understand precisely how we should proceed in our family and lives now. So as you can see, based on this conception of religion, to which the psychedelic experience in the community are very well tailored, religious freedom in its essence is the freedom to experience and express that mystical beyond. And almost as important from the perspective of community is to teach it to our children and grandchildren so that it may live on in them after we return to the dust. So we must keep in mind that while freedom of religion is a protected right under the Constitution, freedom of spirituality is not. So the words that we use are very important, because when we say, I am spiritual but not religious, we are unconsciously giving up rights. In fact, in the dissenting opinion of Oberfeld versus Hodges, which gave gay and lesbians the right to marry, Justice Scalia mentions both religious freedom, that is in the context of the fact that this ruling will prevent Christians from having religious freedom and their freedom to discriminate against gay marriage. And he also mentions spirituality. And he says, quote, "Really? Whoever thought that intimacy and spirituality, whatever that means, were freedoms?" The Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which the corporation Hobby Lobby used to argue that not paying for insurance that covers IUD was somehow fundamental to the practice of Christianity, was originally written in response to a Supreme Court ruling that said the Native American Church was not protected by the First Amendment in its use of peyote as a sacrament. Therefore, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was written to restore religious freedom to the users of an entheogen. We should not then give up this legislation to those who would use it to strengthen mainstream religious belief in the face of changing cultural opinions. So how then do we proceed? I say that we should be busy bees and pollinate the flowers of our religious communities, just as is happening in underground ayahuasca ceremonies, in mushroom circles, and in consciousness clubs all around this country. As we do this, we will see that there are 5 fruits of strong psychedelic families and entheogenic religious communities. The first fruit is teach without fear. While many see that this is difficult to do under the specter of the Controlled Substances Act, and with misleading or false information being taught to our children in schools under things such as DARE, we must remember that the easiest way to pass on our culture is through our children. It's difficult to change an adult's mind, but when a child is raised to believe that something is normal and natural, then they grow up with that belief. Whenever an invading civilization wants to eradicate a culture, they do so by making it impossible for the culture to be passed on to the next generation. So tell your children the stories of the elders and the heroes of our society. Teach them respect for the plants and medicines through books such as, I have an example here called It's Just a Plant, which is an amazing book to read to your kids to teach them about cannabis, It just came back into print, so get a copy. Also, teach them to expect real magic and awe in the world around them, especially when it comes to experiencing the sacred medicines themselves. And I have a quote from an interview that I did with Dennis McKenna where he said, "Those of us who know and appreciate plant medicines know that the family that trips together has a better chance of staying together. So much of the social dysfunction that we have in society stems from dysfunctional families. If they were able to share these medicines in a meaningful way, it would go a long way toward reducing family violence and making us a less violent, more compassionate society." A really great book series to read to your kids, probably many of you read it when you were children, is the Wrinkle in Time series. But if you go back and read it as adults, especially after a psychedelic experience, you'll be amazed how psychedelic these novels are. And I was reading this third book is Swiftly Tilting Planet to my son. And there's this amazing story where the main character, her little brother is ill, he's dying, and it's from a mysterious illness. And this angel comes to her and shrinks her down to the size of his mitochondria. And they enter the mitochondria, and they see that there are these beings inside of his mitochondria which give the mitochondria life. And they're called farandole. And when they're young, they're like little mice, and they travel around and in and out of this place. And the mitochondria is like the whole world for this being. But then when they become adults, they have to ground themselves. And they become like a tree, and they sway back and forth in this fluid world. And they start to sing. And they say that the song that they sing is the same song that is sung by the stars in all the galaxies of the universe. And I'm reading this story to my son, and I'm just like bawling. And he asked me what's wrong. And I said, oh, this is just like an ayahuasca experience. And he looked at me in his eyes and he said, "Oh, Dad, I can't wait." This next thing is developing real serious community. Another thing is understanding your collective beliefs, finding what are your sacraments, what are your values together, what sacred text do you hold dear, and including your children in the process. We've got pictures here of kids participating in Santo Daime ceremonies in Brazil, kids going with their parents to Burning Man, and also, most importantly for us, is finding your songs. Here's a picture of my wife with our kids, learning instruments. Our tradition is ayahuasca, and ayahuasca is intimately tied up with music. And so we bring the songs from the ceremonies back to our lives, and we find songs that teach our values to our kids. So that's our story. Please join us at psychedelicparenting.org, where we're building something really special. When it comes to introducing your children to psychedelics, is that it's the child's readiness that needs to fuel this experience. Nobody should ever be forced to take a psychedelic, should be coerced into taking a psychedelic, doubly so a child. So it's really important that, we don't say this is the right age or that's the right age to introduce your kids. What's important here is that you take the values that you gain from your experiences and transmit them to your children. And when your child is ready to have that experience in a context, especially if a place that's religiously sanctioned would be the best thing to do this in. But I want to emphasize that it's very important. None of my children have taken psychedelics. They're all young. And it's important that we go by when the child is ready and when they tell you they're ready. The big thing that we suffer from in our culture is a lack of rites of passage. I sort of do part-time driving for Uber at a university campus, and so I get to witness kind of the dark side of the lack of rites of passage in our culture, because there's a big difference between throwing up in a bucket and having this purgative spiritual experience in an ayahuasca ceremony and puking in the back of an Uber on welcome weekend. So this is what we're up against. We don't give our children a context for these experiences, and we don't give them really any guidance about when do you become an adult. We have this extended adolescence in our culture where kids get to be we expect them to make adult decisions, but we don't really give them any rights, and there's no gateway between childhood and adulthood. And I think that in a talk that I did earlier this year, which I entitled Psychedelic Summer Camp, I proposed an idea of creating a container or an environment where children could be initiated into these mysteries in a way that they're supportive of the community and with the support of their parents and their families. And I think, someday, many years in the future, I hope that we can create a container like that when it's legal. And I think that I just think this extended adolescence is a big, huge problem in our culture. And I don't know if that's what you see or not, but I think I see it as that's a big part of what we're up against as parents. We haven't really reached the age where my children are being given that kind of level of indoctrination. We're lucky that our kids are in a public Montessori school, and our school system doesn't use the DARE program. They use something slightly better. But I think that being active as parents in the educational lives of your children, especially in this case, is really, really important. You know, like find out from the principal and the administrators, what kind of drug education do you use? I mean, I envision a drug education that would be more similar to what we consider the norm in sex ed now, is that it's like based on facts rather than based on fear. So, you know, there are schools here in the world that teach abstinence-only sex education, and those are the places where we have the most teen pregnancy and STDs. So when we teach truth, when we say these are the kinds of drugs that are out there and these are the kinds of experiences that you get from these drugs, then, and these, maybe you don't want these kind of experiences, but maybe you do want these kind of experiences. Here's the ways you do those things safely if you're going to do them. It's comparable to, you know, if you're going to have sex, wear a condom. It's the same kind of thing. We need to, and we as parents need to advocate in our schools for those kinds of policies, and you know, let the schools know that we won't tolerate, you know, just say no or drugs are bad and okay. You know what I mean? Having young children present in the ceremony space is a context of when are they ready to have that experience, and they're going to let you know when they're ready. And having somebody who's going to be stone cold sober, who can answer any potential questions they might have, is really important. Our oldest has sat in on an ayahuasca ceremony before, but my wife was there, and she was not taking any medicine. But you know, most of these ceremonies are done at night, and you know, a young kid is going to be, you know, they'll get to sort of watch the beginning and see people drinking and sitting down and not doing anything, or laying down prone, and they're going to likely be asleep before the serious action really starts. So, you know, they're when they're ready. It's all about that particular child and when are they ready. I think is really important in all of these things. When is the child themselves ready? When it comes to the psychological readiness of my own children, I always defer to my wife because she's home with them. She knows where they're really at. But you know, I think that it necessitates like going back to that value of radical honesty and you know, being able to be the grown-up. Because a lot of times when I discuss these things, people point to like the 60s, and you know, there was communes and there was naked kids running around they weren't being supervised and everybody was on drugs or whatever. Because I just want to say that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about building containers where these experiences and these values can be transmitted to the next generation in a way that will actually, you know, improve society. And so, you know what, I don't know if I have a real specific direct answer, because I think that it really is about having an honest relationship with your children. And if you as a parent think that child isn't really ready, then I think, you know, you have veto rights. Whether or not they'll honor them, you don't even know. A 15-year-old will do what they're going to do sometimes. But, you know, at least you've given the child the context of like what is healthy use of substances. And you know, I've interviewed a lot of adult children of like psychedelic people who are extremely well-adjusted human beings. And what I find is that most of them didn't really do psychedelics or even like smoke cannabis until they were like 17, 18 years old. I mean, I started smoking cannabis when I was in 7th grade, and I didn't really have any guidance, and I don't know if that's good or bad necessarily for my life, but you know, I think that when you educate kids honestly about what the effects are and when they're ready for these things, you know, even if they decide to do it with you not there, they're going to have a better sense of like what's healthy.